the cardiac system and the respiratory system, let's call it the cardiorespiratory, everything works together. One thing's not working, there's a problem. It's like a car. If one thing doesn't work in the car, there's a problem. Well, what's the most sophisticated technology in the world? Us, right? There's nothing. Like I have an iPhone in my hand right here. This iPhone, I can't feed it a banana. I have an iPhone 8. I can't feed it a banana and it turns into an iPhone 11 Pro, which my wife wants right now, right? But I can eat a banana and it becomes me.
Welcome to the Upside Strength Podcast, your number one resource for all things fitness and performance in Switzerland. Today, I'll be chatting with health and performance coach and breathing specialist, Brian Kozak. Brian, it's a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so for people who might not know who you are, can you give a little bit of, who are you and what do you do?
Who am I? I own a training company over here, Next Level SP, sport preparation in Canada, in a little town called Kenora, Ontario. So we're the last small little, it's kind of like a town, not a city, but the last city in Ontario, so mid Canada. And then I also do a bunch of work down in the States with Evolve. I think you had Aaron Davis on just a while ago.
Absolutely.
I do a bunch of work with those guys also. And then for me, my background is I played all sports, specifically hockey and track. And then I got into training because I'm 54 years old. So we didn't have all these smart guys like you when in my day. It was like if you found a gym that had, some barbells and stuff, it was usually the bodybuilders and the power lifters. If you're lucky, you got the Olympic guys, but that was not around my area. And then just from my own playing, I knew I needed to do more. I was a small guy back in the old days of hockey where it was the big guys game. So I lifted heavy and then I found my coordination going off. And so I was a guy that always asked the question, why? I asked it so much as a kid. Parents got really upset with me asking why all the time. But that was a good skill for me because it led me to go and find out these mentors. So the hockey players I trained, I'd try and talk to their coaches, right? What are you doing? Because to me, I didn't know if I was pushing my athletes too hard or not hard enough. It was the old mentality back in that day. If you can do what I can do, you're going to be successful if you got talent, right? But how many guys was I ruining? I didn't know. So we had heart rate, and then, HRV was something new, which was great. And then I come across lactate. The Olympic program hockey team was doing that, pulling lactate with one of my players. And so I got to know those guys, and that kept leading me across Canada until I was coaching hockey out in BC, and I met Juerg Feldmann. You had his son Andre on, and you had Roger. That's the connection. Juerg is the genius behind this whole system of what we do. So it's kind of funny. I met him and he's like, okay, let's share some ideas. So I had this book, of 18 years of training athletes, my best techniques. I brought that down to him. He's like, nah, you don't need that. And he started putting these sensors on me and had me breathe into this breathing machine. And I was hooked. It was like, okay, let's figure this stuff out. He has something. He can see a bit inside. So that's, that's my background. And what we did with Juerg and I over that next, 12, 15 years was different companies brought different equipment to us to play with. It was just like, it was like Christmas every day almost. So we worked on, his idea, his genius was that there's a limiting system. And, this is from, our field. We use all the brilliant guys before us, and we use a little bit from this guy, a little bit from that guy. So, Juerg put this all together in a very simple way of understanding that let's see if we can find out what is limiting performance. Not just on the track that we see that, hey, he didn't make the time. Why? Right? And then if we find the why, can we go train it? Because it all comes down to performance, right? Obviously. Yeah, so then from there, had my own acceleration training center out there. And then Juerg wanted me to go out and work with a bunch of different trainers. So I traveled for about 8 years all over the world, working with different trainers and showing them what we do and learning so much from them. And then a few years ago, I decided, okay, it's time for me. I'm the old guy now to start sharing a lot of this. So I had a couple options with some different real smart people, and I ended up hooking up with Aaron Davis and Patrick Estes. And now
Right.
you.
It's a good story. I'd like to come back on what you said about talking about Juerg's system. How did that jive with what you previously knew or thought you understood about training and performance? Did it kind of, apply itself well to the things that you knew plus the things that you didn't know and plug some holes, or did you have to let go of some of your prior beliefs in order to make that system work with everything that it brought from Juerg? So can you talk a little bit about that transition from, let's say, the before Juerg to the after?
Yeah, that's for me. I can say I've always had a real open mind in the sense. A good buddy of mine, Tim Coolis, he was a first rounder, played in the NHL for a bunch of years. He always said, "Proof's in the pudding," meaning if you can't prove it, then you know what I mean. So with Juerg, he proved it. There's no doubt about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, there's stuff that we don't know. So I was always open to what works. And the heart rate monitor, everything is useful in a sense. Do you know what I mean? Like, yes, there's stuff out there that we try and it doesn't really show us something, but we learned that it didn't do what it said. So you're always learning, whether it works or not. With heart rate, to me, it was like, well, the basic definition of cardiac output is heart rate times stroke volume.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the stroke volume?
Yeah.
So heart rate's not giving me the full cardiac output.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I know the beats, but I don't know how much blood is pumping in each beat.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a hockey player that's 6'5", or Chara 6'7" or 6'8", and then have a small guy, it's 5'5", are they pumping? Is their heart the same size? Are they pumping? No way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Just that. So that was a limitation in that. HRV was a great thing for recovery and different ideas, but there again, there's limitations because we're not getting the stroke volume. And so then the physio flow comes out. Now we can look at it all. That answered a lot of questions. There was bioharness, VO2 limitations, the mask, right? Mm-hmm. The size of the mask changed it. There's dead space. There's all these different things. So yeah, it was a good slap in the face every day with Juerg. And what I mean by that, I had certain ideas, because I was caught in models. So there's the anaerobic aerobic model, right? Mm-hmm. And I used to do this lactate tolerance training, just killed my guys on the track. These things, they seemed to work because some of my guys played pro and they became very good pros. But how many guys was I ruining because I seen guys that weren't able to recover and we didn't know why. Mm-hmm. So with Juerg, we figured out these different ways with the technology that they're not recovered yet. Okay, today they're recovered. And as we got into NIRS and you start putting all that together, we get a better physiological picture. Mm-hmm. Now, in saying all that, the coach's eye is number one, always. There's that all the experience you've had, you went to Vancouver and that you played the sport of rugby and all this thing and what you're doing now, talking to all these brilliant young guys and older guys like me, you're picking up these little stuff that you're going to play with, right? And you're going to know that it works or not works. So the coach's eye is number one. Technology just helps us look inside a little more, makes us a little better.
What did NIRS bring to the table that you didn't envision before, and how did you first react to that encounter when you first started using the technology?
Yeah, that's a funny story because we started with a device called the Portamon, mm-hmm. and really, really neat device. We were pulling lactate for years before that, And lactate to me, super interesting. We learned so much off it. It was just like looking at the newspaper the day after. And where was the blood coming? Where was the energy coming from? It's systemic. So with the NIRS, we're putting it on a muscle and seeing what that muscle does. Also, we can see the systemic too. But so I took 4 hockey players, brought them on the ice, poured them on their leg. And I had this silly idea, because of the models of the anaerobic aerobic system, that you're going to skate as hard as you can, stop and starts for 30 seconds. Well, in about 17 seconds, and that's a very important number, plus or minus 3 seconds, they're dead. They're tired. They can't hardly move their legs. They come out of their hockey stance. And so it's just survival for the next, 20 seconds, 23 seconds. So that to me right away, I was like, okay, I see this green line going down. He's moving really good. There's my coach's eye. All of a sudden, I can start to see him come out of his hockey stance. His stride shortens up. And the green line on my screen goes plateaus. So when he gets in trouble, it correlates perfectly with that green line. And even the brown line, this so-called THB, the blood flow, the different ways of describing it, that even shows me before that. And then when those 2 lines come back up, he's recovered. As long as I didn't push him for 30 seconds, because once you go there, there's no coming back. So that one guy is a pro player in Switzerland right now. He was a young guy at that time. I had him do that 3 times. He barely got off the ice. He vomited in the box. Then he dragged himself into the dressing room, went to sleep, woke up, come back out to watch the last person. So I said, well, 30 seconds is really too long. So these old ideas and this technology, I'm saying, okay, when does he fall apart? That's when we stop him. And from that, we built a model and we switched that model of anaerobic aerobic to a simple optimal performance and survival.
Right. Is that where Aaron gets the survival training term from? Is that from you?
Yeah, that's it. Well, us together. It's never my stuff. It's our stuff, right? It's all of us putting our minds together on the shoulders of all the guys before us. How we figured that out, Juerg took me over to Switzerland, and it was awesome. Got to tour your beautiful country, and we worked with a bunch of different athletes, and but we were in his hometown of Davos, and he goes, so Andre was there, and the other brother, and Florin, and athlete, hockey player that was I trained for years. She worked in my company for me. She was playing hockey in Austria, and Juerg says, we put a Moxy on our leg. He goes, you're in a hockey bound, so 45-degree jumps up that mountain to that restaurant. And I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm 48 years old, Juerg. I showed the hockey players, how to do a couple bounds, but never up a mountain.
Yeah.
And he said, just go by what we learned so far. No, let's just go by the technology. So I start bounding, and as soon as before that line starts to plateau, I'm going to switch from optimal performance, and you can feel it. That's the beauty of it, is linking that feeling, your knowledge, that feeling, to the technology. Once you have that, I knew when to stop. So I stopped, recovered, and then kept going up this mountain, and people were taking pictures, like these hikers, and people were laughing. And when I got to the restaurant, I couldn't believe it, because of the anaerobic model, I should have been done a long time ago. I kept on going past the restaurant. Then I stopped. I said, I better go down. So I came down, and everyone was there. And right there, he says, what did you learn? And I just that it doesn't fit the model. I used oxygen the whole time. And better yet, if I stop before my oxygen gets in trouble, I don't jump into those other tanks, so to speak. I can keep on going. It's just the limitation is going to be that I don't do those jumps, which was right. So the next 7 days I could hardly walk, but that's because I don't do that, and my muscles weren't used to that.
Right. So you talked about that 17-second plus minus 3 as a very important number. So can you go a little bit farther in that? Is that specific to what you might do on the ice? does that cross over into all the other disciplines essentially? That, you know, is that for somebody who's maybe well warmed up and well trained, 17 plus minus 3 seconds is the time it's going to take you to fully desaturate your muscle? Is that the main idea?
Yeah. So with the NIRS, what we found out was that first we went into endurance training with it, right? I was the acyclic guy. I was playing with it, and it was a lot more difficult to figure that out. But Juerg's background more is into the endurance stuff, so it was very easy to just slowly increase your pace, right? And we ended up this 5-1-5 test. We learned a lot of stuff off that. But once we got into the acyclic, that's what we found was going full out intensity in every sport we tested. And the other thing is, before we talk about anything, before we share anything, our thing, Juerg and I, was 1,000 tests minimum. So we know if we see it and we can explain it and predict it, we'll tell you about it. If not, it's just something we're playing with. So we found that over 1,000 tests, obviously, in all sports, that full out intensity was 17 seconds plus or minus 3. That's when, and you know, if it's straight away, no problem. But once you start stops and starts, obviously the eccentric and all that, less time. But that's your kind of your range there. Okay.
Yeah.
Now that's when all of a sudden they're going to shift from that optimal performance, what the coach's eye sees, the optimal coordination, into that survival. Now you can last in that survival, but the performance goes down. Now they start using auxiliary muscles to do the work of the main muscles, right? So we see it as they come out of their stance, their athletic stance, their stride shortens, all these different things.
So you can essentially see, like you said, not only can the athlete feel when they're switching from that optimal to survival, let's say, training, but you can also see it from the outside, as in, and you talk about on the ice, but you can see that when somebody's running and they're sprinting and their mechanics completely go to shit, and they can't hold their stride properly anymore, and that indicates that they've come out now of that optimal zone, and it essentially, like you said, correlates with there's no more oxygen available in those maybe prime mover, those big muscles, and now we're relying on all the other guys that shouldn't be doing the job to do it, and so that's why it looks like shit.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the 400 meter, you just watch the Olympic 400 meter, you'll see it. They look like thoroughbred horses running, right? Head perfectly straight, everything is in line. And then around that 300 meter mark, you start to see the toes come out a little bit, the head maybe shake depending on the guy. That's what's happening. And we can see that live, and we can see it before it happens. Now, very important for the coach is to be able to get the athlete to feel that when that's happening. So when I was traveling around and working with all these different trainers, and just awesome, you know, people invited me into their gyms and show me what they do. And that's what I would say. I'd say, okay, you know, when that guy's falling apart. So maybe they're pushing a sled in the gym, you know, with weights, and you go, yeah, right there. And I say, yeah, that's what I see too. Tell me when he's recovered. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, well, tell me when he's recovered. Because you can see with your coach's eye for sure, when he's falling apart, he's switching. And they go, well, I just know. Well, how? Right? Well, that is the beauty of where that technology really helps us. We can see when he's recovered. So at first, what we were seeing was the oxygen would recover, and then the THB would recover, and vice versa, one or the other. But when both of those were recovered, we thought the athlete was recovered. But was he? And then all of a sudden we saw some guys aren't. Well, why aren't they recovered? What are we missing here? And you mentioned it, the oxygen. It's when your breathing's recovered, you're recovered. So now without the technology, and don't get me wrong, the technology is great. We use it for a bunch of other things, but once your breathing's recovered, you're recovered. So if we can use the technology, for example, I have an athlete on a bike or whatever he's doing, and he sees the screen, he can say, okay, Cozy, I'm switching right now. Yeah, Now I'll turn the screen away. You tell me when you're switching from that optimal performance. And they'll, within a couple times, they got it. They have it, which is a huge advantage in the game, on the pitch, right? On the ice. Now, when are you recovered? Right? They wouldn't know because they couldn't see when the oxygen and the THB are recovered. But once I told them is when your breathing's recovered, everything's recovered. Well, they know when their breathing's recovered. So now they have it. So now that can be used as an individual team tactic in a sport and as a team strategy.
Yeah, those are two very practical considerations, I think, because we talk about how, how great NIRS is and what information it can give us on what's going on under the hood. But then with those two things in mind of when you fall apart and then when your breathing is recovered, that's essentially your proxy, your like kind of real life proxy for this is what's going on from the oxygen standpoint. And now you're good to go again.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the beauty of using technology, so-called in the lab, but our lab is at the gym. And then they can take that and use it in the sport, and that's the, I think that would be the larger or the best thing that's come out of this for me is that now, because I also coach hockey and different sports and that, and it was always what the lab has, these ideas that we have in the lab, and what the coach's ideas, they don't really go together often, right? So how can we integrate what the sports performance is doing, right side, with the coach's idea of how the game's played? Because the most important person is the coach, right? Then your players, right? And then so how can we help the coach integrate what we're doing in the training? And that was how, that's with the NIRS and with the respiratory, that's how we figured that out, is now we can integrate that. Because let's just put it in terms of and we're going to dive deep into this, but if you have a power play, so like in hockey, there's a penalty. Now we have one more person on the ice than they do. We have a better chance of scoring a goal, right? Better chance of hopefully winning the game. Now, if we know that, and especially in hockey nowadays, before they used to box out, meaning they would just protect the front of the net and you had to try and get pucks through, right? Nowadays, the athletes are so good and their eye and the coaching is so good that if a player bobbles the puck, turns his back, they close the gap instantly. And not just one guy, they're taking away all these lanes of passing lanes and shooting lanes. It's just brilliant. So it's very forceful on when they're the team that's shorthanded, they're moving quickly. You make a mistake, they're on you. So now, if you know that we have an extra guy, why don't we move that puck around really fast? Because we have an extra guy, right? If you use triangle, thinking in the triangle, we always have one more guy. Now, we make them move and they're stopping and starting, which is super hard because they have to get back to that box and protect the net. But within 17 seconds, plus or minus 3, they've switched to survival, which is a limited tank. You'll see it in their breathing. You'll see it in hockey players, their shoulder pads will go up and down. Now we can have our strategy of how we're going to attack that net because they're already weaker. They're already limited. So now we're taking this technology, integrating with what the coach knows. He knows, hey, when someone's tired or someone drops a stick, we're going to attack the net, right? Yeah. Well, how can we use that? Well, we can use that on a power play, that man advantage situation.
That interest of yours in respiratory training is something that I want to dive into with you today. Was that something that you were always aware of, or did that arise, like you're saying now, from monitoring yourself and your athletes with the technology and then essentially seeing the major role that respiration plays in obviously the transport of oxygen, the extraction of CO2, and as such, performance in general?
Yeah, man, your questions are really good and you throw a lot at it. What happened was, like I said, when I was young, I got to work out with power lifters. So I was this little guy, this little small guy, small for the hockey game. And I was about 145 pounds. I'm not that sure what that is, divided by 2.2 for your kilos. And I needed to get bigger because I was getting pushed around on the ice. So I got into the gym. The power lifters told me, back then McDonald's was new, so eat McDonald's, the shake, the straw didn't even move, So I'm just pounding back all these calories, not that most healthy. I got big. I got up within a year and a half. I was like 185 pounds and just incredible weight gain. But I had no endurance no more. Coordination too was a limiter, but I couldn't last on the ice. And I just noticed I was just breathing all the time heavy. And I was done. If I stayed on the ice a little too long, I was done for the rest of the game. So I knew that didn't work. But there was nothing out there about breathing. I did a bunch of research, and I'm not saying that nothing out there. I couldn't find it. It's not like we had the internet like now. I had the Britannica encyclopedias. Right? There wasn't much on respiratory breathing in there. So go to the library and then asking all these different coaches as the players I trained, and no one really had anything. So when I got out to BC to coach hockey and met Juerg, the first thing as soon as I got in there, he put these sensors on me, he gives me this machine, the Spiro Tiger, and says, "Hey, breathe into this." And I couldn't fill this bag. And I'm like, "Well, who can do this?" And he puts his bag on, and I'm like, "Okay, if you can do it, I can do it. Take me more time, but I'll figure it out."
So for people, sorry to cut you off, for people who don't know what it is, what's a Spiro Tiger? What's the bag you're talking about? And what is this tool all about?
Okay, so it's a company out of Switzerland, IDIAG. A lot of smart guys come out of there. So they made this, I think it took them around 15 years to figure it out. It's incredible. So it's just a little plastic machine that you hold in your hand, right? And it has your own little breathing unit, this plastic pieces with a diver mouthpiece. And there's a rubber bag, like an anesthetic bag that you fill up and empty. So it's just like filling a balloon, like an expensive balloon filler, right? The problem with the balloon is you get a little dizzy, right? So with this machine, it makes sure it keeps you in a certain range. So if we think of there's oxygen and CO2, they have to work together. It's super important, right? If you have too much CO2 or not enough, there's a range, right? So you can have, too much CO2 or not enough. Let's just play with the CO2 because it's easy to understand that way. So altitude training, right? You got too much CO2, right? People that overbreathe, mouth breathers, upper chest breathers, they have less CO2. They both cause problems. Okay, so health, right from the health on. So this machine, this Spiro Tiger keeps you in that certain range. There's other machines that they do mostly exhale, power lung. There's a bunch of different machines. But the beauty of this one, and there's a new machine coming out called NX, really robust machine. Same thing. It's like they called it an endurance machine because you could breathe for a long time on it. Or a balloon you couldn't, or the power lung you only have a limited amount of seconds before you're in trouble, right? So with this machine, you could breathe for hours. That's what cyclists and rollers do. When I got it, my thing was, how do I bring this into the acyclic? Because it's all about moving a lot of air really quickly, right? More on the recovery side. Now to understand that, when you start sprinting, skating, the cardiac system and the respiratory system, let's call it the cardiorespiratory, everything works together. One thing's not working, there's a problem. It's like a car. If one thing doesn't work in the car, there's a problem. Well, what's the most sophisticated technology in the world? Us, right? There's nothing. Like I have an iPhone in my hand right here. This iPhone, I can't feed it a banana. I have an iPhone 8. I can't feed it a banana and it turns into an iPhone 11 Pro, which my wife wants right now, right? But I can eat a banana and it becomes me, right? We're the most sophisticated technology. So let's make sure we understand that. So if one thing doesn't work, it changes everything. That little thing about the O2, CO2, if that's out of balance, that changes everything. So let's just walk down that road. If my CO2 is a little high, it opens up the arteries, vasodilation. Now there's hemoglobin, I call them the cabs. They pick up 4 passengers, hopefully, in the lungs, and they bring them down to the muscle, and hey, get up, right?
Right.
Well, if CO2's high, a little high, it'll unload all 4 of you and your 3 bodies out. Get out of the cab, get into that muscle, go into that bar or whatever you're going into, right? Go into the gym.
Right.
Now, because the vasodilation, the arteries are opened up, now the cardiac system has to work a little harder because it has to maintain a blood pressure, has to maintain a temperature, right? So all these things are working. Now the cab gets back to the lungs, the CO2 is high, so it cannot load as many into the cab. It can unload them, but it only loads you and another buddy now, only 2. Well, that's a problem if you're going high intensity because oxygen is a fuel. Okay. So with the Spiro Tiger, now when I brought it into the acyclic, it's really about your cardiac and respiratory system. There's a lag. So when you sprint, you hardly breathe, right? It's at the end where you're really breathing. Or if you're still sprinting and all of a sudden you notice you're breathing, you're in trouble already. That's how we know, right? The coordination can change or my breathing's out of control. So when you gave me this device and I started to play with it, I'm like, whoa. Not only is this going to make my lungs bigger, right? And hopefully there's no structural problems with my rib cage and all that. There was, not until I found out later, but pretty much anyone, especially you guys, rugby players, there's going to be problems, injuries that cause changes that you've learned to use a different muscle motor pattern to protect something, right? Or something tightens up to protect something that was injured. So with the breathing, I found out right away that we could, within 4 to 5 weeks, would increase, especially younger guys, their lung capacity by almost 1 liter. And not only that, I could move more air. And that's super important, the amount of air you can move in a minute.
How do you go about figuring out, how to use that tool in terms of is there standard protocols that are used with the Spiro Tiger? Is there different protocols depending on what you need to work on specifically in your respiratory system? If we're talking about, if I understand correctly, you can, like you said, there's all those parameters within the breathing, the respiratory system that are somewhat parallel to the kind of the strength training, right? You got reps and you got sets and you got time under tension, and the same way you have volume inhaled, volume exhaled, you have the kind of the breaths per minute, you have the strength of the inhale and the exhale. So how do you play with all those parameters in order to put together a program that makes sense for someone?
Oh, that's you're exactly right. So if we look at that's a deep question. That's a big rabbit hole. Let's look at the cardiac system. The cardiac system has your heart rate and stroke volume. So the heart rate's the speed, and the stroke volume's obviously the volume. It's right in the word. So same with the respiratory. The respiratory, you have the respiratory frequency, how fast you can breathe, and then you have the tidal volume. So on each breath, how much air are you moving? And that's what we dove really into, because if I breathe faster, I can move more air, or I keep the same breathing rate, say 20 breaths per minute, and I just breathe more volume, a bigger bag size. That's the beauty of the machine. You can change the bag size, and obviously you can change the speed. So both ways I can move more air. But what's the optimal speed and size? That was what we wanted to figure out for our athletes. So once we figured that out, if we just put it in terms to make that part simple, is if with the NIRS is as you go, if I have a person running, sprinting on the field, and for rugby, I'd have them, depending on the position, obviously, or soccer, or basketball, or hockey, I have them do what's very sport specific to that sport. So if there's stops and turns and, those agility, tight turns and that, you have to back check all the way down the field, whatever it is, we do that. That's the beauty of the NIRS. We can make it as sport specific as possible. So we can see what's happening on the inside as they're playing their sport. So when we see that, we want to see when he falls apart, and then how long does it take him to recover. So say he lasts that 17 seconds plus or minus 3. That's only going full out. What if he sprints like in soccer and then jogs? Well, he'll be able to go again longer, right? Mm-hmm. But we'll get those numbers. So when we see that he's moving, he runs down the pitch, and all of a sudden he loses the ball, and he's a midfielder. He's got to come back, right? We'll see when he starts to fall into trouble, when he switches from that optimal performance coordination into that survival. So say it's 20 seconds for that guy, because he had some speed up and slow downs. Mm-hmm. That's more game-like, right? Mm-hmm. And now how long does it take him to recover? So say it takes him 90 seconds to recover. So once we know those numbers from their performance, can we decrease that recovery time? Well, how much air is he moving? So this is how we started figuring this out. Well, this guy can move 150 liters in a minute. Well, what if we can make him move 300 liters in a minute? Can he recover in 45 seconds? And that's what happens. Now, to get there, it's not that easy, right? Like you said, just like lifting weights, right? There's so many different things you can do to improve an athlete. And sometimes, like for me, lifting too heavy, too much wasn't the best thing for a coordinated guy. So when we go into breathing, when I first meet people, I say to them, what's the most important thing in your life? And it's always, usually I'd say most family, wife, kids, right? It's younger kids, they be like my truck or my snow machine, or, there's funny things, my cat or my dog. So then I have them do a little game. How long can you hold your breath for? And athletes love that, especially if you got a bunch in a room like a hockey team or a rugby team. And I'm going to time it. I'm going to say it every 10 seconds and see who can do it the longest. And then I'll say, okay, why did you stop? So the longest guy was 90 seconds, which is really good. Why did you stop? He said, well, Coach, you told us to stop so that we don't pass out. I said, yes, but what if that great big guy over there jumped on you and held your nose and mouth and wouldn't let go? What would happen? And they'll finally get to, well, I'd be dead. Well, if you're dead, you don't have your cat, your dog, your snow machine, your truck, your family. So breathing is the most important thing in your life. And that's a reality that we got to pause on, because it's not in our reality in that sense, because it's unconscious most of the time. Mm-hmm. You're only really conscious of your breathing is when the athlete gets in trouble and starts breathing too hard, right? Now he knows he's got to slow down. He's got to recover that breathing and then get back into the game. Or you take a meditation course and they start teaching these things. Otherwise, we don't pay attention to our breathing. But our breathing is the most important thing, because if you don't breathe, you're dead. Mm-hmm. When you came into this world, you inhaled. When you leave, it's going to be exhale and no more inhale. That's it. You're done. The game's over. But in that, from when you're born to when you die, the amount of breathing you do is unreal. It's your best friend. It's with you all the time. And it's the only thing really that you can change, that you have a control over. Right? Most of the other systems in this run, your kidneys, your cardiac system, yes, there's guys that can do some stuff, but the breathing is the master controller. So then I ask the guys, how do you breathe? So then we get them to put a hand on their chest and a hand on their belly. And I just fully inhale and fully exhale. And what I'm looking for is, how do they breathe? Now, most of the people breathe upper chest. So they have this huge tank, right? That maybe it's 5 or 6 liters of air they can hold, but they're only using the upper part. And to do it, they're using the wrong muscles to do it, right? You see the shoulder breathers. If you watch, like in a hockey game, pro players, the NHL just finished. The Stanley Cup was just won. They play 20 minutes. They come off the ice. They have a 20-minute break, and then they go back on for the next period. Now, when they come off the ice, they usually get interviewed. The top player or something happened during the game. So he takes his he skates off the ice. He's taken his gloves off, right? They get dried out. Took his lid off his helmet. He's fixed his hair, right? And he's ready to do the interview. And he's breathing with his shoulders. And we did, and you're like, what? The guy just had like a minute minute and a half to recover his breathing. Why is he still breathing, and why is he using his shoulders? Because those muscles have to be used during the game to pass, to shoot, to hit, to fight. You know, in hockey we get the fight still. So those shoulders are very important muscles. Why would I keep wanting to use them, right? So if when we first get athletes or anyone, is we want to change, make sure their breathing is efficient. So they're breathing the right way. Mm-hmm. If there's a structural problem, then there's certain people like a Juerg and that, and now we have Patrick Estes and Aaron, they'll manipulate, they'll start with the sacrum and they'll work and make sure what's out, and then can we realign it? And there's some great PRI and these different, just like that, there's 3 or 4 different these manual techniques that are incredible for opening this up. Mm-hmm. A limitation of these techniques, and with us too, is that if you have a pattern, like for example, when I was in yoga and I was overseas in this intense yoga program, my left shoulder was lower than my right because I've had multiple separated shoulders, and I was a small guy getting hit in hockey. I never knew that, and then this yogi standing in front of me, he says, "Brian, you got to drop this shoulder," and you got to turn a little to the left, and my head was turned one way and my shoulder was this way, and when he did that to me, I felt I'm way off. Mm-hmm. Because my normal center mm-hmm. was not centered. So to realign that, they can do it. They're amazing at it. But how do you rewrite that pattern in the brain? Because mm-hmm. in me, I under any so-called stress is something we make up. Any situation, any game situation, I'd go back to that pattern. And that's where the breathing, so we have to correct it. And then a tool like the NX, the breathing machine, that can help us solidify, help us rewrite that pattern in the brain. Mm-hmm. So they stay in that structure. Because once they're in that ultimate structure, then we can increase their lung capacity. Then we can increase their coordination of breathing.
So like you said, there's a huge role that the axial skeleton plays on breathing mechanics. You talked about, breathing the right way and then breathing with your shoulders. So can you go a little bit deeper into that and the role of how everything's positioned, rib cage, the pelvis as well, and then how that plays with or interplays and is all connected with the diaphragm and all the breathing muscles?
Okay, so before we jump into that, because that is the key of correcting that. It's understanding that, remember that balance of the O2, CO2. Mm-hmm. Super important to understand that, because that affects everything, right? How you breathe affects everything. So what I mean by that, how I walked you through how the vasodilation, well, if you don't have enough CO2, mm-hmm. it causes a vasoconstriction, mm-hmm. right? Now the vasoconstriction changes everything, meaning it'll load up, the cab will load, it'll be really sticky, the oxygen will load, you and your 3 buddies jump into the cab, but then you don't want to get out of the cab when it gets to the muscle. Now the heart, the right side of the heart has to work even harder. There's less preload. There's all these different things that are affected, but I didn't say about the mind. Now the mind shifts, so your autonomic nervous system to a sympathetic, to a fight or flight. Okay, so when an athlete comes in and we look at their breathing, obviously, and we're seeing, okay, they're upper chest breathers, looks like an over breather, so he's going to have a lot of tension. So we have him sit down and just put his forearms on his knees, and he's sitting in the chair, and just relax, right? Just close your eyes and relax, and just let your breathing go normal. They cannot do that. Everyone knows that. As soon as you think of your breathing, you manipulate it, right? It takes years to train, not years, but you get there. You can get there where you can just watch your breathing. But people's hands will be curled up like they're holding a baseball. Why? Like my hands are perfectly flat without stretching them. I'm not stretching them. They're perfectly flat. Mm-hmm. It's because they're carrying tension. That's just in their hands. You get to the lake, or for me, the golf course, or I'm going fishing this afternoon. I get out onto the lake, go fishing, and all of a sudden you just feel your shoulders relax. Everyone has that, right? It's like a big exhalation and, yes.
Yeah.
Right? Well, all day that tension was ramping up. Why? Where does it come from? Right? Well, your brain and your breathing are directly linked. How you breathe affects how you think, and how you think affects how your mind. So I'll ask a question. I'll say, are you the master of your mind, or are you a slave of your mind? And when I ask that question to athletes, it's always the master. So yeah, perfect. Okay, let's play a quick game. So you see how I play games. The way I teach is experiential learning. Mm-hmm. Don't believe what I say. Test everything. Try it out. So I'll give you games. So I want you to close your eyes and not think a thought. And as soon as you think a thought, you open your eyes. No one lasts 5 seconds, because thinking that I'm not thinking a thought is thinking. Right? There's this voice in this head, and that's another conversation. But so how you're not the master of your mind. This phone right here, when it beeps or it rings, I'm like, well, I'm on it. I'm having an amazing conversation with you. You're asking these freaking so deep questions that are very complex. But that phone rings, I'm on it. So that phone owns me. I own the phone, yes, but after a while it owns me. Well, why? Right? And so we tell our athletes, because their phone is with them all the time, especially nowadays, we say from now on, just this week, you come back this weekend, you come back Monday, it's Friday, just pay attention. As soon as the phone beeps or rings or whatever you have that buzzes, right before you touch it, go to your breathing. Are you holding your breath? Are you breathing fast like a dog in a hot car, panting? What are you doing? And most of them, the high majority, so I'll say 99%, I think I'm a little low on that one, they come back and they say, I hold my breath. As soon as that phone goes, they're holding your breath. So what happens when you hold your breath? CO2 level goes up, vasodilation. I can unload the cab, but I can't load it up. My heart has to pump high. My brain switches over to sympathetic, fight or flight. Just my phone beeped. So how do I change that, Cozy? I don't want to be holding my breath. I don't want to change that. And I'll give you an extreme case of it. A buddy of mine that we do a lot of work together, real smart guy, works with baseball players, pro guys. Gets a guy on the table, relaxes the body, from manual manipulation. They have the Moxys on, so they're also seeing what's happening with the oxygen, and the THB doesn't only show the flow, it also shows the force, the tension force. Mm-hmm. So contraction, vaso-occlusion, arterial. So it gets this pitcher relaxed. And then he takes a baseball and puts it in his hand as he's laying on the bench, and all of a sudden he retightens everything up again. It's mental. Mm. On the NIRS, we see he starts to create tension. He starts using oxygen, the fuel. He's laying on the bench, on the table. Takes the ball out, gets him back into that relaxed state again. Now he puts the ball, he has another ball, but the pitcher doesn't know it's taped in electrical tape. And he puts that in the athlete's hand, and no tension. The ball's inside there. He just doesn't know. He just thinks it's the ball tape. Mm-hmm. So we see this when we have athletes on the ice. I'll test them. I'll have 8, or on the pitch too. I'll have 8 at a time. Okay, we're going to do this pattern. That's your sport pattern. So in hockey, stops and starts for a forward. A defense will go forward, stop, come backwards. Now we're going to do this for 20 seconds. In 10 seconds, ready, you got 10 seconds, 9 seconds, and all of a sudden I'll see the oxygen going down and the THB tightening, compressing. He's mentally already using energy. Mm-hmm. And you know this in your sport. You'll see guys, you play the sport, you'll know guys would puke before the game, or they get so nervous, right? And guys have different techniques. If they've had the opportunity to be with a psych, they would work on different sports ideas of meditation, visualization. Well, once we get the athlete to realize that breathing is the most important thing, how do you breathe? You're not the master, right? Well, how can we switch that breathing? So let's give you an example. You're driving a car and you're late for an important date with your wife. It's an anniversary, or you're late for work or an important meeting. You're late for a podcast, right? You're zipping there, and all of a sudden some guy cuts you off and he slows right down. What happens? We've all seen it. People get angry, right? And we've all lost it. When you get angry, you're out of control. I've seen guys punch holes in the friggin' drywall and kick stuff, break their toes, you know, throw things, smash things. We all see it. You know, our parents when we were young, losing their mind. That's how we figured it out. Hey, when I get upset, just lose my mind. So when you get angry, you're out of control. How's your breathing?
Out of control as well.
Yeah, you hold your breath. The crazy ones hold their breath. So most of the hockey guys, they hold their breath. Rugby guys, I'm sure. Or they breathe super fast, out of control. Right? We had these bioharness. We did all these tests with them. The bioharness shows the rib cage moving, which gives us a breathing wave. It's out of control. So we would put people under stress just to get them in that state. And we'd have a breathing mask on them too. And so we'd see how their breathing would change, right? They would hold their breath. They would breathe really shallow. Well, that's what's happening in your mind when that person cuts you off with the car, right? And you flash one of the fingers that means something not nice, you know. Whatever you do, whatever your mechanism is when you lose your mind, if you just stop for a second and change your breathing, you cannot be angry. Once your breathing goes back to normal, you can't be angry. We all know after we finish, it's like, oh, it took a lot of energy out of me, man, right? But if you practice this, and this is what we train our athletes, if you change your breathing to normal, you'll feel, in me, I could feel the energy when I was frustrated starting to come up. And at first, when I was practicing this method, that's too late, it's coming out. Right? But that's okay. Don't beat myself up. Just go, okay, I caught it, but it was too late. Then the more I do that, I catch it earlier. And then all of a sudden, a frustrating situation, an angry situation, I just breathe, and now I'm in total control. I can still go over there and smash the guy over the head if I want, or I could verbally abuse him, or I could say nothing, I could smile and wave, but I'm the master now. So how did I do that? Well, I put my attention on my breathing, and I learned to use my breathing as a tool. See, it's just not, can I last longer and recover using my breath as a tool in the game? The most important thing for me is I want to be the controller of me. So breathing is the master controller. Now, the game of understanding that and the ability to understand how I can manipulate my breathing by increasing my CO2 for certain types of training or decreasing it. So hypo or hyper. Now I can do altitude training right here with this amazing INX machine, right here at sea level. Now, jumping back to your question, now we understand that, how important it is. Pardon me. Is talking too much, I'm getting dry here. Is the structure. Before we do function, we have to have the structure, right? That's not my area of expertise. I know it, but it's not my area of expertise. So if I'm sitting with a guy like Aaron, I could be telling you, and when the big words come up, I'll just move my mouth and Aaron will speak. I can put it simple. I'm a practical guy. I'm the guy in the trenches. So the rib cage, if we just look at that in the pelvis, everything is connected, right? So first of all, with any of our guys, go see a specialist in this. Make sure that they can realign you. The limiter is keeping that alignment in there, because your brain, the master controller, this voice, it will, under stress, under a certain situation, it'll put you back in that situation. So there's certain breathing with the breathing machine. And next, we have you, once you get realigned, we have you do certain movement patterns with the machine. And that way it can solidify the way you should be moving. And that was a game changer for us. You know, once I went down with Aaron and Patrick, and once they realigned me, and then I'm like, well, I went right back. I could feel going back into it. I could feel my left side heel going into the ground. And okay, how do we change that? So then we had these breathing movements. These two Italian guys, when I was over in Switzerland, we had the first Moxy seminar over there, and it was at IDIAG. So we had the Spiro Tigers were there and everything. And I gave my lecture, and these Italian guys are like, hey, we want to know what you're doing with that Spiro Tiger. We'll show you what we're doing. They were working at that time. They had these MMA guys, opera singers. They had the two world champion deep sea divers. So they had some stuff I wanted to know. So we ended up exchanging these ideas, and that structure is super important. If you just think of a squat, right? How many athletes, I don't know if you see this in rugby because I don't work with rugby athletes, but if they have their own ideas, like back in my day, we just watched guys lift and we just mimicked it, right? And there's a mirror and you try and look the same. But in hockey, the hockey stance is your knees are bent, say at 3/4, your ankles, knees, and hips have to be bent together, right? There's a certain range for the optimal hockey stance, and it all depends on how long you are and how short your legs are, how long the legs are. But ideally in hockey, you could take a hockey stick and I could, in that hockey stance, touch my shoulder, my knee, and my toe, pretty much. So that's the ideal stance, depending on your size. So when we were doing squats, we really pushed our glutes back first, right? And our knees went over our toes. Well, we were told, no, you don't want those knees way over the toes. It's not good. So then we compensated by pushing our glutes back even further as we sat down. But the problem was our lower back was arching. So it wasn't flat, it wasn't straight. So now we're putting this enormous force, right? Because when you're young hockey players, you just want to lift more weight than the next guy. So now that created a lot of problems for the possibility of injury down the road. So it's the same thing in breathing. The pelvis has to be in a certain position. There's an ideal position for it. We have different movement patterns that helps realign that position. So when a guy gets on you for a PRI or whatever they do and they realign you, now we can help bring new memory to that movement pattern. The rib cage itself, as you breathe, it's like one of those tensegrity balls. It crushes and opens up, they're really cool. When you inhale, you'll want to open up the bottom of your rib cage, but you also want to be able to open up everything on the rib cage. A lot of people, they breathe in the front. Well, why not the back? Use the whole thing. So the diaphragm, the main stabilizer, right? So in all things, the diaphragm contracts first, even before the heart. Boom, you move, it's contracting. So that'll open up the rib cage, but also you want to be able to collapse that rib cage a bit too, so you can exhale properly. So it kind of explains what you're talking about without going too much into the structure.
No, it does. It definitely answers the question. You mentioned how by changing your breathing, you can change your state of mind to make it, kind of short. But then, like you said, breathing is a tool, and you apply a tool differently depending on the situation that you're in. So if you're in a non-stressful situation, but you get worked up, you can use your breathing to get you back down to baseline. But say you just did a 20-second all-out play or 17 plus -3, and now you want to get back to baseline. Is that breathing pattern going to be the exact same as trying to get you out of trouble when you shouldn't be in trouble? If you see what I mean.
I do. Awesome, man. Perfect. You're just segueing perfect into what the next thing is. I guess that's why you're the interviewer.
I'm doing what I can, man.
Okay, so how we teach that, we'll take a couple steps back. We just get people to sit still and have their, again, like the tension test of the mental, just have your forearms on your legs and palms open up facing the ceiling, and fully inhale and fully exhale. And as they're doing it, close your eyes so we take the visual out of it. And I just want you to pay attention to where you feel the inhale. The inhale is the important thing in this game. And then after 3 or 4 breaths, I'll tell them to turn their palms down. Flip the palms over so the palms are facing down on the lap. And now where do you feel the inhale? See, because me telling them something, it's like reading a book. Yeah, they know about it, but they don't really know how to do it, right? I can read a book on flying a plane, but you ain't going to jump in a plane and fly with me unless I go and learn it, right? So there's knowing, and then there's the experiential. So once they do this, palms facing up, they'll notice that they breathe more upper chest. As they keep on inhaling, exhaling, they turn the palms down. They'll notice that the air goes down deeper into their so-called belly. that teaches them that the body position has a lot to do with where the air goes in you. So I married an Italian. They talk with their hands. They're going upper chest, lower chest. They're all over the place, right? No wonder they're swearing so much. So we want to teach the athletes that we have to keep hammering home the breathing is the most important thing. The breathing is the most important thing. So once they start to understand that, and we'll do another little thing. Yeah, if you take your pointer, your finger here, index finger, and you wet it, and you stick it underneath your nose, and you just exhale a bit. One nostril will be dominant. Now, if it's the right nostril, it's connected to the left side of your brain, so your logical side. If it's the left nostril, it's connected to the right side, so your creative side, right? Now, and again, don't believe me, test this out yourself. Every 40 to 48 minutes, that changes. Now, if you have a plugged nostril, of course, it's going to be one nostril, right? If your nose has been broken multiple times like mine, luckily the last time it was broken, it straightened it out, so it works good. So if the nose is okay and there's no obstruction, this will change every 40 to 48 minutes. So that means the left brain is more dominant, my more logical side. So hopefully I'm doing math and some science then, or I'm having a good discussion, good argument at the Italian supper table. Or my right side, if my left nostril, so I'm more creative. I should be doing some artwork. I used to draw. I took fine arts at school. So I should be doing that. With our guys, we want it balanced. And there's a breathing technique that within 4 minutes, I can balance that. So mine, before I got on the air with you, I did this 4-minute breathing technique. So I'm balanced. It's like if I wanted to add a deck to my house. So I call the carpenter over. He comes over and I say, okay, this is where I want the deck, and I want it, maybe this many feet out. And I go, are you going to measure? And he's like, I don't bring my measuring tape on Fridays. I only bring this half the toolkit. And I'm like, get out of here. It's like, I want the whole toolkit, right?
Right.
So same as us, we want access to both sides of the brain. We want all our tools, right? So how you breathe determines that, and we can teach a technique to switch that so you have advantage of using all the tools, the logical and the creative. And in sports, we want that. We want the guy that high percentage plays. I know that's a high percentage play, but I want to see some creativity, a little fake here, a little, shot here when you wouldn't think it. So now, once they understand that, how can they use, so all these games are to get them to understand that breathing is the most important thing. It's either you control your breathing or your breathing controls you, right? If you want another tool, the most important tool, or another way I could say it is, when I ask trainers, I go, do you train all the muscles in the body? And they're like, yeah, of course. Like, that's what I do, right? That's my specialty. So, okay, so you train the diaphragm. And they're like, what do you mean? So, well, that's one of the most important muscles, because breathing is the most important thing, and the diaphragm is the main stabilizer, right? And we can jump down that hole about abs and how to breathe properly. But you train that, and they're like, no, not really. Yeah, maybe when they're breathing heavy, yeah, but it's like a weight. So you're just saying that if I give you a 1 pound weight, it's going to make you a lot stronger. Mm-hmm. No, it'll do those things, but I also want 500 pounds too, because that does different things. So when I say that, it sounds funny. Respiratory muscles, right? It's already in the name. We should train them. Okay. So now that we understand that the athlete, okay, Cozy, you're beating this point. You're killing me on this. I understand breathing is the most important. For sure. Yes, for sure. Okay. If breathing is the most important, how can we use it in the game? So if you and I are going to dive in the pool, and our ability to swim is the exact same, right? And we can make about 3/4 of the pool, and we have to come up. So we're betting, guys. And today you're feeling good, Cozy. I'm betting you lunch that I'm going to swim further than you underwater. Here we go. But some guy taught me that if I just blow off a little CO2, just not crazy, because I don't want to pass out underneath the water, just a couple. Then my O2 level, if you think of CO2 and oxygen as two people in a teeter-totter. Is that what you say, brother? A teeter-totter?
Right, yeah, that works. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, like you jump on one end, I jump on the other, you kick up. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So if it's balanced and all of a sudden I blow off a little CO2, you're up in the air higher, the oxygen, and I'm the CO2, I'm a little lower. So once we both dive into the pool, I'm holding my breath, you're holding your breath, but your CO2 is already rising up. Mine's rising up, but it's still not back where I started because I blew it off a little bit. So now today I get to the end of the pool. You only get 3/4 of the way. I get a free lunch and we're going someplace expensive. It's a great day. Just because I use that knowledge of my breathing. So before a player jumps on the ice, before the ball, what do you call it? Is it same as in rugby when the ball is lifted? What's it called? Is it a certain word for it? Like in football, in Canadian or American football, it's called snap the ball.
Right. You would usually have, if it's a stopped phase, you would have a scrum or a line out. So before the ball is put back into play.
Yes. So okay. So just before that, why wouldn't I blow off a little CO2? Right. So now with this idea, let's go play with it. So we put the Moxys on and we have an athlete sprint, do the movement pattern, right? And he switches doing that movement pattern. He finishes so say that it's 50 meters, he does it 4 times, right? And that equals 18 seconds. Now he stops, we recover him totally, and now we get him to blow off his oxygen, his CO2 down, and have him do the same pattern, and he can get a little further. He can last a little longer. Now he lasts 20 seconds. So we've used that to manipulate that. So just before the scrum, and if your breath is trained on a machine like the NX, then you could blow off more CO2. So you can last longer. During the game, anytime you slow down, you can blow off more to recover. So how we teach guys right at the start, I'll have them do, if you have 3 flights of stairs, it's awesome. I just want you to jog up those 3 flights of stairs, right? You can do it with squats too. It's just squats, they can kind of cheat, you know, they shorten up their squats. Right. So you have to have the right height of a chair so that they can touch down. Well, their ankle mobility is not good enough. So, you know, they'll cheat. So, but running upstairs is real. You can do it with squats, but running upstairs is perfect. They get to the top of the stairs, they're breathing, they're a little controlled, right? The legs probably felt a little heavy near the top. They walk back down, recover them, meaning their breathing's recovered. And then have them blow a little CO2 off and do the same thing. And they'll get up there and their breathing won't be as much. Now so I do that right away with them. And the opposite, I'll get them to blow off some air, like just, and then hold on empty. And I'll try and make those 3 flights. They won't make it, right? Because now their CO2 is so high that it shuts them down. There's no O2 sensors. There's chemoreceptors in our brain. That's what shuts us down. And the piping in our head is so tiny, thread-like, that a little change in the chemoreceptors, that's what the body goes, whoa, we're in survival. Let's shut down the legs because we can't kill ourselves, right? It's unfortunate in sports, but it's really good for your survival. It's like when you're freezing on a mountain, it takes the blood from the limbs to protect the core. That's its last defense, right? The brain goes, whoa, I'm going to keep the core alive. That's why if they get found and they survive, a lot of them lose their fingers, toes, ears, and nose, right? Same thing happens in sports. The blood is taken into the core. If the respiratory system needs more or the cardiac system needs more, it'll take more blood, limiting blood flow to the peripheral. Once you switch into that survival, there's different ways that the brain will either limit the blood flow or lessen the muscle units. So before an athlete jumps in on the ice or before a scrum, he just blows off a little CO2, changes the teeter-totter so he can last a second or 2 longer. A second longer in hockey with a pro player is 4 meters. That's the difference between scoring the winning goal for the Stanley Cup or preventing it. Now, anytime he has a slowdown, a stoppage in play, we know that because of the NIRS, SMO2 recovers, your THB recovers, and then your breathing. If you can blow that air off quicker, you recover quicker.
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you get a stoppage, blow the air off. So yes, now we can use those as a individual tactics in the game.
So when you say breathing the air off, I guess one thing that many people say is after a hard play, after you're breathing hard, you should try and slow down your breathing. Does that kind of go against the idea of you're actually trying to, you need to blow off CO2, you need to reload on O2. So what do you think of that statement of, oh, you need to slow your breathing down?
Oh yeah, that's a really good statement. And there's some really good books out. Oxygen something. It's a weight cover, really good book. This new one I'm reading right now, I'm not done it yet. Breathe by James Nestor, I think. Hopefully I don't. Oxygen Advantage is the first one.
Right.
And that Breathe by that James Nestor. And there's a bunch of guys, and Yetko and all these different guys that amazing results and stuff. And I hear where you're coming from in the sense that it's a little more complicated, so I'll try and make it as simple as possible in that sense. Most people overbreathe.
Mm-hmm.
So they breathe upper chest, especially more females we find, but most athletes too, they overbreathe. They mouth breathe, so they're overbreathing, and so the CO2 level is down and the oxygen is up. And it's causing all vasoconstriction, all these different things that are happening. Pardon me. So what we want to do is, ideally, there's a range that you can be, that teeter-totter can be in a range. Advanced breath respiratory training is, we want to increase that range because we want to be able to play in that range, just what I'm talking about. Mm. Now, once there's an optimal breathing rate. Remember how fast you breathe and how deep you breathe? It's really important to find the optimal rate, because there's dead space. See, from your mouth to your lungs, your trachea, that's a tube. When we're younger, we can actually make it a little bigger, but it's a limiter. You can only move so much air so fast from there.
Okay.
But every breath, I'm losing a certain amount, say from a quarter to a half a liter of air stuck in this dead space.
That can't be used up in the lungs, or that can't be fully extracted. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's really important. If I'm breathing 100 breaths per minute, so I'm super trained, right? A small little bag. I'm moving a lot. There's a lot of dead space in there.
Right.
If I take that down to about 30 breaths per minute and use now like a 5-liter bag, right? There's less dead space. Somewhere in between is the optimal, right? Somewhere in between is the optimal. And that's really important to understand. So there's an optimal way for your heart to run, your breathing, every system to run. Now, when we're training athletes, once we get the structure right and we start to teach the technique of breathing and opening up the lung capacity, increasing lung capacity, and getting the coordination, the inhale exhalation, we want to make sure that is efficient as possible, because most people don't exhale enough. It's like a person with asthma. They come back and they're like, I can't get any air in. Yeah, just exhale. Oh, yes, right? Now, don't get me wrong. There's obviously some problems with that, but a lot of times it's just they're full of air. Most people that overbreathe, they have a problem of exhaling. So one way we test them right away is we ask them to do this. So just breathe as fast as you can through your nose like this. Well, I've trained it so I can go for a long time. Most people, when you do that, they'll do this. Because they can't, the exhale and inhale, they're not equal, or even close to equal, right? And there's more stuff talk about the diaphragm, how it's a different muscle. But so with that is the coordination of that. How good is your inhalation, exhalation coordination? And are you overbreathing? So what these books are talking about is they want more CO2, because the CO2 is super important. Johann, I'm going to say it wrong, probably, but I'll try Friedrich Mesh. He was one of the guys that said his famous saying about CO2 spreads its wings over the O2. O2 is a poison. It's a super inflammable, highly flammable poison, right? But the cells have figured out to use it as an energy source, but it needs the CO2, right? Super important. So to unload the oxygen, so people can have a high oxygen, they call it bioavailability. But we see they can't use it on the Moxy or on the peripedal. We see they can't use it on the NIRS device because their CO2 is too low. It doesn't unload. Remember the cab? It's too sticky. So these guys are talking about we need that optimal range to unload that oxygen. Need that. Where I'm talking about with the athlete, we've already trained that. We already have that range. They're already very, they have that range now that they can unload oxygen as efficiently as possible. Juerg and I, when I was over in Switzerland, we were working with Dominic Jensen. She was won the gold medal in downhill skiing, 2 Olympics ago.
Okay.
Swiss girl. Awesome, amazing person. Like frick those. I never knew about downhill skiers, how crazy they are. We had the crazy Canucks, but when you're actually talking with them and she tells you like, I have a split second to make a decision and I know that every 3 or 4 years I could have a career-ending injury. Like for her to make that decision in a split second is incredible. Anyways, we were up, what's Saint Moritz? Is that what it's called?
Saint Moritz, yeah. Saint Moritz, yeah.
Right. It sounds way better the way you say it.
Well, it's just the French version.
Cool place, like you stop your vehicle and get into a train, go in there, and so we go up and we have 8 Moxys on her, but we're up there, Juerg and I've Shelby, used to be my trainer, my head trainer, and we're testing. We have end-tidal CO2. We're playing with our oxygen. So all of a sudden I got to go to the washroom. I'm thinking, okay, I got all these sensors on me, but I got to go to the washroom. It's just a little incline of a hill, not much, up to this restaurant, right? We're on top of this mountain. Not even thinking. I just start jogging, right? I get into the washroom and I sit down and all of a sudden I'm passing out, right? Well, I know, and a split thought goes in my mind like, oh, this is going to look funny in the papers. Here's this respiratory specialist, right? Passes out in the washroom, right? Because he ran at altitude. So I had to do the opposite of what you think to let the oxygen unload in my muscle. It was unreal, but I did it and I didn't pass out, which is good. So when we train these athletes at first, we get that range so they can unload. They're not mouth breathers. There's a very important reason. There are many reasons for breathing through your nose. And now that they have that range, they can unload at rest. But in the sport, we can manipulate it. So less is more, yes, right? Less means if I breathe less at rest, I have a little higher CO2, so it unloads more efficiently. See, that's the thing with the SpO2 and a pulse oximeter. You had Andre on there, he described it, right?
Yep.
It's coming from the heart right now in the arteries, right? The Moxy, the peripedal, they're showing us what's happening, not peripedal, portamon. They're showing us what happens in the muscle, right? So it's different. It can be very different.
Yeah. So
in the sport, what I want to do is I want 1 more or 2 more seconds. So if I can play with that CO2 and blow it off, don't worry about unloading the oxygen, because as soon as I start sprinting, my CO2 is going to go so high, I can unload oxygen. We know it because we have the technology on and we can see it. Now, as soon as I stop, right? And don't believe me, as soon as you stop, just go and sprint or run up those stairs. Get to the top of the stairs. You're breathing fast and hold your breath. You won't do it or you'll pass out. If your will is that strong and you can overcome the convulsions that are going to happen in you, right? Yeah, we work with like Navy SEALs in that, they go into those intense convulsions. We're working on them to be able to last longer doing that. So you're going to exhale because you have to balance the CO2. Once you're balanced, that homeostasis, you're ready to go again. Well, how can we decrease that time? Well, train your breathing so you can move, instead of 150 liters, 300 liters. So you can blow it off in less the time, so you're ready to go again. So that short question, it was more complex than that.
Which is what I like. I've got a fairly specific question, and then I have a how to say that, voluntarily broad question for you. The one I want to come back on, a point that you mentioned, is breathing through your nose, the importance of breathing through your nose, and maybe playing devil's advocate here, but when you get to certain intensities of the game, let's talk about sports, is it right to say that only breathing through your nose is not going to cut it, that at some point you're going to have to use your mouth? And in that interplay, so where does the nasal breathing, because it has become somewhat of a popular thing as well to do kind of nasal breathing training and tape your mouth up and go do some aerobic or some like cardio, if you want to talk like that. So can you talk a little bit more about nasal breathing, its role, its importance, when it might be a good idea and when it might not be?
Okay, yeah, you're right. It's worth, I highly recommend to do, I'm trying to think of hypoventilation. There was the greatest Russian endurance guy that only went I think he ran the 5,000, 10,000 and never ran the friggin' marathon, and ran it in the Olympics and won it. 3 gold medals. That I can't remember his name, but do some research. Just do some research on these guys. A famous swim coach in the States did these methods. So these methods of hypoventilation training and that, great results. We do a lot of that stuff both ways, because we can manipulate it both ways with the machine. Now, coming back to the nose, just thinking of the breathing of nose right up the start. And I didn't say this at the start when I introduced myself and told some of the history of me. I got with Juerg, he was the greatest questioner. He was a better questioner than me, and I thought I was the greatest questioner. No one asked why as much as I did, but that guy does, right? So that's why I think why we hit it off so well. But we got to a point where I wanted to go more into the mental, because I knew the breathing affected the mental, and so I needed to find something else. So at that time, my dad ended up, he had some cancer, and he was looking for different ways of healing besides doing, what's recommended with the chemotherapy and all this stuff. And so I'm a voracious reader. So I had all these books on spirituality and yoga, and I took karate and all this different stuff. And so I sent him all these books, and he come up with this guy, this Sadhguru guy that teaches his yoga. He goes, Brian, I'm gonna go see this guy. So I'm like, okay, Dad, I'll go with you. So we hook up in Chicago, and we go down to Atlanta. I had to meet this guy anyways that does this electricity, the iMile Pro, real smart cookie. So it worked out perfect. We get there, I do this course with my dad, and by the way, the cancer healed up and everything. Was an amazing story. It's been cancer free. But in that course, I go, this guy taught me something that's unbelievable, this meditation. And I dove into it for 7 years. I've finished everything they can give to me. My wife and I, we went over there, took a 6-month intensive Hatha Yoga teacher training program. My day was up at 2:30, 2:45 in the morning. I wouldn't go to bed till 11:30 at night. It doesn't sound normal. That's what it was, right? But I learned the Eastern ways of breathing and meditation and yoga. It was incredible. So that added to my knowledge of this breathing. And it's huge about the breathing in nose. Remember, I just told you your nostrils change every 40 to 48 minutes. Mm-hmm. And the position of your hands changes, the position, the body position. So breathing with your nose, just for this fact, especially as you get older, you get more hair in your ears and your nose and everything, right? So it's collecting, it helps the nostril hairs. It helps collect all this dust, skin floating around and all these molecules, and plus all the stuff that's in there, the slime in your nose or whatever. For just health, it's great. It changes the ambient temperature, which is huge, right? because it takes energy. If you drink something cold, your body has to switch it to what it uses, something warm. So now it takes energy. Everything's about energy. What we've been talking about is energy. So the basis of life is energy. And I'll just say it simply, and you already know this. When you're sick, COVID's going on right now. When you have the flu, a cold, anything, when you're sick, what do you want to do? You want to lay in bed, watch your favorite shows. The eyes might hurt, so you close the blinds, turn the TV off, go to sleep. Don't bother me. Low energy. But when it's your anniversary or the birth of your child, or you're talking to someone that really fires you up, or you're trying a new piece of technology, your favorite team's playing rugby, the energy's shooting through the roof. Sometimes you can't sleep. After rugby, could you sleep? No way. After a game? No way. You can't just go to sleep. You're so fired up. So that's when the quality of life is great, high energy. So the whole thing, the whole game we're playing, this life, is about getting the energy to the ultimate, right? So that I'm always like this, right? Now, if I become the master of my breath, anger is not a thing I have in me anymore. I have options. I don't react, I respond. Well, anger sucks the energy right out of you. So now if I don't have anger, I can still look mad. I can still be intense. I still raise my voice, right? But then I can look at you and smile right away, instantly, because there is no anger, because my breathing is right where it should be. So all these things I was searching for, and it leads back to this, to your nose, to nostril breathing, in the sense that, one, the ambient temperature. It also collects all those molecules, that floating skin dust. And also there's some nitric oxide in there. And there's more other reasons. That nitric oxide is important. It acts as a vasodilator, which is very important for certain things. Too much of it, no good. It stops oxygen from going in the cell. So there's that range, remember? Mm-hmm. It's like the grandfather clock. Too far is not good this way, too far is not good. Somewhere in the middle is perfect, right? Same as lifting weights, same thing. Too much of lightweight, too much of heavy. There's different things that's why we're chefs. We get to play, right? That's the beauty of it. So with that nostril breathing, it helps for so many reasons that, like I said, and now it helps in regulating the heart. It helps in vasodilation or vasoconstriction. And if you go to the mouth in sport, and normally you're a nose breather, it's because you have to. It's just a bigger hole, right? So yes, you're going to have to do that. But also, if you and I are having a fight, MMA, and all of a sudden you're nose breathing, you go to your mouth, I know now that you're already in trouble, right? So we work with some MMA fighters, UFC fighters. Now, the mastery of the breathing. I want to breathe through my nose, right? Because my CO2 will unload easier, right? They talk about increased performance. We can increase red blood cells, the EPO doping and all that. We can do that naturally just by going hypoxic, right? It carries more O2, the ability to unload, increased endurance, more muscle mass. They talk about what else? What's that? Growth hormone releasing, all this. These are all things coming from proper breathing, not just the nose, but the nose is the way. So when we're going to, in that MMA fight, and I see that you're breathing with your nostrils, and all of a sudden you go to your mouth, I'm putting pressure. I'm on you, right? You have got to do what to recover as quick as possible? Blow off your CO2. Mm-hmm. So now you go into the defensive posture, or you get to the ground, you're blowing your CO2 so you can get back to your nostril, right? So it's a visual cue for one, but also it has many advantages.
And so in that realm of, you talked about before, and you mentioned it, and you probably alluded to it a few times so far, and that's the kind of broad general question that I had for you is, how do you breathe properly?
Well, you have to hire someone like me is the best way to do it. If I was coaching and just saying, okay, start by paying attention to your breathing first. Okay. So pay attention to your phone. And every time your phone buzzes or rings, what's your breathing doing? Pay attention to when there's any sort of so-called stress. Stress is a made-up thing like fear. Our body's going into a fight or flight before it even happens. Yes, we want to be prepared, but wouldn't I want to be prepared by breathing perfectly in the zone when I have both my whole toolbox on my brain, right? Mm-hmm. It'll release adrenaline real quick when it has to, right? So we want to get into that state. They call it, what do you call flow state? He's in the zone state, right? Mm-hmm. We do that by breathing. So we have to start paying attention to breathing. Anything that you're really good at, you're really good at doing podcasts. How many have you done? 60, 58 or something?
61 after this one.
61. Are you better than you were from the first one?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Same as weightlifting, same as rugby, any sport you choose. Whatever you choose to be good at, it correlates directly with the amount of tension you put on that. Mm. So if we think of attention like a sword, I want to sharpen my samurai sword so it's razor sharp. I can see something, I can cut through it logically and creatively, right? So when I'm focusing on my breathing, I'm actually doing two things. I'm increasing my ability to be attentive, and I'm increasing my ability to see how I breathe. Now, once I start doing those things, I can put my attention longer on my breathing. Because breathing really right now, to most people, it doesn't mean much because it just happens anyways. They don't understand that how they feel right now is just, it's like they're at 40% maybe for a number of their energy capacity, right? And then all of a sudden they get really excited to get a new car while they're at 80% instantly. A few drugs were released from the mind, right? They feel great. But then after about a month, that new car, right? Like when I was a kid in the bike, Dad, if you buy me that red bike, I'll never ask for anything again. He buys me the bike. Within a month, he ran it over because I left it behind the car. I came home late for supper, left it right behind the car. He took off, drove over it. Then it was a car. Then it was a truck. Then it was a snow machine. Then it was a house. It's always going to be something that I'm searching for, right? Something that I need. So once we understand that breathing is the most important thing and how we do it changes the quality of our life, gives us more energy. That's that understanding just of that will change your life. So now I put my attention on breathing, my phone, anytime I get frustrated, angry. And then how do I breathe? So I put a hand on my chest and a hand on my belly. And most people will breathe from the chest. What you want to do is just kind of try and bring the air in deeper. Well, then I could take my palms and turn them down because already that brings it in deeper. Mm-hmm. I could lay down and have my palms down on the floor and bring it in deeper. Now, people say, well, it's belly breathing. Yes, a baby does belly breathing because everything's so tiny in there, right? So when the diaphragm opens up, the rib cage opens up, that's very important. The diaphragm pushes down the insides, then organs down, and so it looks like they have a big belly. Belly breathing is not trying to put air into your belly. That doesn't make sense, right? The lungs aren't there. You're filling the lungs. Mm-hmm. It's the diaphragm pushing that down. So once you can start getting the air going deeper into, you can feel it going deeper. And you're going to be breathing with your nose or your mouth? Your nose. It's the most efficient tool. Use it. There's lots of stuff on that. That's super important just for cleaning the dust in the skin, ambient temperature, so more energy, and a little bit of that nitric oxide. Just that alone, there's a ton of stuff on it, but that alone is worth it. And then as you're breathing through your nose, bring the air down deeper. You'll start to feel it expand more. That's the first thing. You becoming aware of how you're breathing right now, because most people aren't. Now, as you do that, you can put your hands and you get better. Some people will put a book on their belly, right? And they'll start to raise the book as long as you're not using the belly to protrude to do that. Okay. Now let's hold that thought for a second and talk about that because that's very important. I remember, and I taught it, just like lactic acid tolerance training I taught until I learned that's insane, is that it was bracing. Just before you lift the weight, brace, just like someone's going to punch you in the stomach. And I did it all this time. So until Juerg taught me, right, he had this, I don't know, measures electrical activity, ECG or
EMG maybe?
Yeah, you put those on you and he goes, okay, brace and then bend over and do this. And you see the electrical activity. It's in my lower back. Like, it's just, the strain is crazy. He goes, blow this balloon up. So I take a balloon. Okay. Blow it up, tie it up. He goes, now push it together, your hands together. No way am I going to get on a fully balloon. He goes, that's core training, inside out pressure. Mm-hmm. That's how we train the core. So just think of rowers when they're rowing. A Swiss guy changed the breathing pattern, but that's another story. So when they're rowing, they exhale on the pole, right? Mm-hmm. So they're tightening their abs so they're exhaling, then inhaling, and they're tightening, they're bracing their abs on the inhale. Mm-hmm. Well, if you brace your abs, so you could try it right now. You just squeeze and brace your abs, and then try 4 or 5 quick inhalations. No way, it's hard. Right. Now relax your abs and try 4 or 5 quick ones. No problem, mm-hmm. Right? So when you contract your abs, when you brace, do not inhale. That's the only time you don't want to inhale. Yes, the obliques they should be a little tense because they help in that, but just basically your abdominals are exhalation muscles. They're mm-hmm. sneezing and coughing muscles, right? So the stabilizer is the diaphragm. The abs have to be relaxed. That's super important. So when you're laying here, palms down, focusing and putting your attention on bringing the breath in a little deeper. And then you'll start to feel on your rib cage, it'll start to open up just like this sideways. Mm. And that is key. And you can Google the Italians I referred to before. They worked with these MMA guys, and it shows us the deep diver. So put deep diver, breath training, and it shows him, he'll open his rib cage, and then he'll open one way up, and then the other one way up. It's kind of freaky, but it just shows you the strength and control of that diaphragm. Mm-hmm. The diaphragm is a very important muscle. It's like the tongue. They're both innervated with both sides of the brain, which is really cool. But also the diaphragm doesn't relax as quick as normal muscles, right? It's something we have to train, and you can train that. It's very important. You train that on that NX where you can, so we get our athletes moving 120 breaths per minute on a super small bag. Mm-hmm. And now that's just like contract, relax. Coordination is the basis of all training, right? Mm-hmm. The more efficient those athletes that look smooth on the pitch, on the field, they can contract and relax. We see it with those speed climbers that climb up the wall in 6.5 seconds. On a Moxy or Portamon, it looks like this. It looks like an ECG, like a cardiac, because they can contract and relax so fast. On our best skaters and runners, when they take off, contract, relax, and then they get into their stride and it relaxes a bit. Mm-hmm. So that diaphragm, we want to train that diaphragm. So now back to the person, he's laying there now, he feels or she feels the ribcage opening up. Perfect. Now you're starting to do that now you have to train it, right? Create that neuroplasticity, that wire that's going to get stronger and stronger. And then as they stand up now, most people will breathe with the front of the chest. So you want to look in the mirror or get a person to put a hand on your chest and between your shoulder blades, mm-hmm. and breathe in, take a big inhale. Most people, the front hand will move. Mm-hmm. So now we want to train that. Well, that goes back to also the mobility of our shoulder girdle, right? So mm-hmm. there's different things we want to train to have that whole, most people when you ask, they'll move their elbow like this instead of moving the whole shoulder girdle. The scapula, trying to touch those shoulder blades together, super important, right? Mm-hmm. So there goes back to those PRI and those guys that manipulate that. They want to open that up. We can do it without touching you. We can do it from inside out too.
Right.
Yeah, both a little quicker.
That makes sense. Brian, it's been a great pleasure talking with you today. And I feel like we could have another podcast worth of conversation to have on all those things. And I'd like to have you back on if you're willing to, but for the time being, so for people that, maybe for those that have just been exposed for the first time to the depth, no pun intended, maybe it was, to the respiratory training kind of realm. And I think you gave a good little starting point in that last answer of yours, but as closing words, where do you start with all this?
Yeah, I think, with this company Evolve, out of Austin, Texas, we're going to do we're just preparing ourselves now to really start to share this. With the NIRS technology, last August, we started, I was one of the guys with the first initial Moxy. I had the old Moxy, right? Juerg had the Portamon, his partner Herb at that time, in fact, Canada, said, Cozy, we got to check out this thing. So I got that, contacted Roger, and we started that whole process. Now we started, the first Moxy seminar was over in Switzerland, and they've done stuff. And since then I've went and worked with these guys down with Evolve, and we started this NIRS to get the NIRS out there and how to practically simply use this technology. Well, it all ties to the oxygen. What are we watching on the NIRS? Oxygen.
Right.
So then we know breathing is the most important thing. Let's become masters of oxygen. How much can we move, and how coordinated we can get to do that. So with this Evolved HP and Evo Lab, we've designed this new breather, so the InX, and now we're going to start teaching people how to simply use this technology. So through them and my company up in Canada, Next Level SP, that's where you want to start. There's a bunch of great people out there. Like breathing is becoming, there's like these books coming out. There's some really smart people in it. What the advantage of what we're doing is we have the machine, which is huge. And this new machine goes to your phone now, so we can track it. Wherever you are, you could be breathing over in Switzerland and send me a video, and I'd have the data, and I go, okay, so we just got to change this here. Right? We want to work on this. So that's really exciting. That's coming out right away here. We're hopefully by Christmas, New Year for sure. Nice. We'll start doing seminars and that and sharing that. But for people, hopefully they understand that breathing is the most important thing. Just hold your breath, you'll breathe. Once you understand that, then if you want a better quality of life, because how you think is how you breathe, and how you breathe is how you think, then that should be your focus. Go figure it out. Contact us or talk to a guy like you, right, that knows a lot of people, and they'll get you to the right person.
Thank you so much for your time and sharing all that with us today, Brian. It's been a real pleasure.
Sean's a pleasure, man. And I'll definitely come back for you. Have a chat with you again.
That's great. I'll talk to you soon, man.
Okay. Off fishing.